How do people sell their soul to the devil? Here's how it happens.
The soul is the operating system of your computer. You're not selling your soul. You're selling access to your soul. The devil doesn't possess you. He is in his own world. He just trolls you. Do you understand? And once you give him that access, he doesn't settle here. He doesn't need your heart at all. He settles right here. The devil is in the head. God is in the heart. That's why you hear things you shouldn't be hearing. You feel things you shouldn't be feeling. You have panic attacks, their wild weakness. You wake up in the morning and just feel like you've been unloading trucks all night. You feel like you've been unloading trucks? You have a spasm in your chest. You have thoughts that, what's happening to me? You go to the neurologist and he says everything is fine. You go to the psychologist and he says everything is fine. She says, but I feel it. Why do I feel this? What are you giving access for? I experienced total negative feelings. So it's a state, total fear, total hatred, total disappointment, total anger. So this feeling, loading yourself like a virus, that's it. The dialogue says, I'm controlling this virus. What does a person do? He sells soul, or he gives away his soul.
Cult or something. In everyone's head there's a devil, but again, it turns out that the image is collective. All right, let me start from the very beginning.
How people sell their souls to the devil. So how does this happen?
The soul is the operating system of your computer. Here's the first point right here. I completely disagree with him because this statement gives the impression that I am the main one. I have some kind of computer. And on it, there's an operating system called the soul. So much. This is a low quality placement. This word that I am not ready to agree with this at all. The soul is the most beautiful. It's the most perfect part of a person. That's what we carry in our hearts. Yes, that is true, but to call the most beautiful, the most perfect, the most aware, the most loving part of yourself simply an operating system, I can't bring myself to say such a thing. So no, I categorically disagree with him here. After all, the soul is paramount. The soul is something that is a field structure, and it exists incomparably longer than the person himself. So the person physically no longer exists, and the soul doesn't go anywhere. So with such positioning that it's just an operating system, no, I disagree. No, and the person who wants to know what the soul is, who intends to do this, to feel, to understand, and to see, that is, there are practices, there are exercises. Who wants to know what the soul is, who intends to do this, to feel, to understand, and to see, that is, there are practices, there are exercises. When you direct your attention to the area of your heart, you roughly feel the center of your physical heart and start to dive into it with your attention. And at some point, when you stop getting distracted by the outside world, when you stop perceiving the reality around you and manage to dive into the depths of your heart, and the depth of our heart is nothing other than the area of Bindu. Here, that's where all the beauty of the soul opens up to you. And obviously we are inseparable from it. We are one whole with it. But its power, its might, its beauty, its love, it is incomparable to any human being. Plus the soul has layers, at certain layers of the soul. All of humanity is one.
Anton, you mentioned earlier that there are indeed some entities that have access to us.
Well, let's go on, yes, further now. It's too simplistic to call it an operating system. That's what I'm getting at. Let's keep going.
You're not selling your soul.
You're selling access to your soul.
Access to your soul? Once again, the soul is powerful. It is perfect. It is absolute. And even having access to it, causing it, any harm is unrealistic. All harm will burn away. It's the same as trying to cause some harm to the soul. Fiery plasma, well, poke it with a stick, for example. The stick will burn away immediately. So no, harm is inflicted on a person. A person who opens access to their thinking, to their mind, to their consciousness, and then it sinks.
The devil doesn't possess. He exists in his own world.
He exists in his own world. Look, our reality is multidimensional and multi-layered. There are definitely worlds where beings exist. Fiery beings, inorganic beings, infernal beings, suras. There are a huge number of their names. For example, in my tradition, in what I tell and show, this is called the space of the fifth gates. Where the infernal beings are located, where the inorganic beings are, that is the space of the second gates. So these are certain layers, the universe. And yes, they live there. It's home for them. And they have the ability to reach out to us from there. Just like with people, and also from the fifth gates, they can reach out to us. And from the second gates, they can also make contact with us. The second gates mainly deal with, well, first of all, they make contact with creative people who abuse all kinds. Drugs. These can be direct drugs. It can be alcohol. It can be some forms of nicotine or tobacco consumption. In large volumes, it also acts in a rather clouding way. And it's precisely through substances a creative person has the opportunity to touch this space of inorganic beings. Naturally, they start to interact. Inorganic beings, what do they need this for? Interaction, in order to manifest in our world. Our world is layered, you could say, and more intricate in its complexity and more nuanced in its structure, higher up than it appears, higher than the world of the inorganic. And the inorganic wants to break through here. It wants to be here. It wants to experience the possibilities of perception through the physical body accordingly. People who start to flirt with them can fall under their very strong influence. This strong influence can cause emotional, very serious outbursts. Mental illnesses. Not all mental illnesses, but a certain number of people are not under the influence of these beings. And these beings need a person, so that he lets himself inside his body, so that he creates a body for them. No idol, so that he creates a body for them. So why do creative people mostly get caught up in this? Because a creative person can create something, some material object that will attract attention. And they, being in this object, will feed on this attention, evoking certain emotions. There are beings of a different plane. So this is a world that is already above us. This is precisely the world of the fifth gates. And from there is also interaction. There is also a certain influence, but a completely different story begins there. So they have no desire to come here, to do something here, there. You could say it's a mutual satisfaction of their passions and needs. And to call all these beings, they are all devilish creatures, again, doesn't quite work. Because they are just beings inhabiting our universe. They were created by the Creator just like us. That we can interact with them. Yes, we can. The fact that they have their own interests, yes, they do. The fact that some of them can have a very harmful influence on a person. Yes, they can have a very harmful influence on a person. There's one more point right now further in the video. It's a last topic. In fact, even though...
Correct. I understand that if a person resorts to harmful habits, addictions, drugs, alcohol, then they automatically open up access to these beings. Right.
Not quite. If a person brings out their talent in this way, in a thoughtful, creative, innovative, impactful, and meaningful manner. I have come across people who, for some time, do not use anything, and their creativity, it just pours out of them. But then something happens to them, and they start to resort to mind-numbing substances in order to continue to be creative. So they can't do without it anymore. Why does this happen? Overindulgence leads to waste. Basically, this happens because a person allows themselves too much indulgence and too many resources are wasted on nothing at all. And when he allows you to spend a huge amount of resources on pleasure, there's nothing left for creativity. He needs stimulants to get into that state of creative flow. There's nothing left for creativity. He needs stimulants to get into that state of creative flow. He takes it. These stimulants, he starts using them, and in doing so, he opens up a space through which inorganic beings interact with him. So, these are the beings of the second gate.
And what makes this dangerous for a person?
You know, for a person, they don't pose a direct danger as such, but they can really mess with your nerves. So they can be irritants. They are irritants. They provoke emotions in a person, causing mental instability. A person gets all worked up, emotional, and can burst out laughing out of nowhere. In other words, he becomes irrational. At that moment, he experiences energy spikes when a person behaves strangely. So, the being brings him to motions and the person gets emotional. It creates an energy spike. His brightness increases, or rather, it pulls brightness into itself. So at that moment, they are actually just eating, not nourishing themselves.
They feed on the energy of a person.
Yes. Yes, it's the same as a little weak animal that annoys a horse and then drinks its foam.
The video also mentions that the devil, well, let's not call it the devil, but rather entities. Some of them, they don't get into the soul, but rather they get into the head.
And here we are entering another facet of these processes. He just controls you. No? Yes. He says he controls you. He says it's the devil. I can name a huge number of entities that can control you. The second gates, the fifth gates, there are a huge number of them, all sorts of forms, all sorts of words, and it's definitely not just one being. It's a multitude of beings. As soon as you gave him that access, he doesn't settle here. He doesn't need it at all. Your ways, again, he doesn't settle here. But person says he doesn't need it at all. He can't settle there because it's pure fire. How can you settle among the strongest fire? It technically can't settle there. It just won't survive in the fire. So you need a more compressed, more crystallized space, a slower space, not just slower, but a very slow space. That is a place where you can grab onto, where you can hold on. You can't grab onto fire, you'll just burn in it. So it's a place where you can grab onto, where you can hold on. You can't grab onto fire, no way, you'll just burn in it. Heart fire. That's why they can't settle there.
But what if there's no fire in the heart? Not everyone has fire, right?
So
What?
there's a concrete slab over that fire, which is why there's no fire. So again, let's move further along in the video. They are right here. The devil is in the head. God is in the heart. Here, God is in the heart. The devil is in the head. But I say that we have divinity in our heart. I say that we have a soul in our heart. I say that our heart beats. Basically, it's all the same. So, how is it? He mentioned it at the very beginning as if it were an operating system. There's nothing here at all. Look. All right, let's go. I see that you want to ask.
All right. What about our fears? You said that the stronger the emotions, the more these beings feed on them. So how our experiences, fears, such intense bursts of anger and hatred can influence this? If we, for example, experience a strong feeling, pleasures or joys, will they also live off that? Of course. Yes.
Of course. It's just that a person is such a unique being that it's much easier to push them into negativity than in positivity. Why should they bother? So how much do you need to do to genuinely feel happy, to really feel good? And how much do you need to do to make you snap? 1. A rude word. You poke with your finger. That's it. You don't need anything more. So why strain themselves to make you happy and wait for you to finally feel joy when they can just make you joyless, aggressive, dissatisfied, crazy, and twitchy? It's done quite simply. So it's a basic question of common sense on their part.
So it turns out that we need to learn to control our feelings, emotions, and not...
Absolutely not. If we try to control it, we've already lost. That you control. You can outwardly, on a physical level, not show that you're crazy. You might act cool, but inside you're just, I don't know, fire. There's even an expression for it. There. Bud is on fire. Well, yeah, I can sit here like I am. When I'm calm. I'm absolutely calm. So what is there to control? You've already lost it. If we're talking about emotions, then basically we shouldn't feel them.
But how do you not feel them?
To train. When a person moves towards their original energies, when a person hears their own vibrations, coming from the heart, there's no room left for other vibrations. Emotional vibrations, they are false, they are not our true nature. They are formed by this inorganic consciousness. But we fall for this provocation and keep spilling over. So, in order for all of this to go beyond just a few words and to become a real working model, you need to learn to see your own energy, or at least feel it. Here's a person who comes to me to learn. Right away, off the bat, we start with him looking for personal ways to perceive energy. It all starts from the tips of your fingers. That's when a person finds a way to perceive their own energy in some way. He can see it, he can feel it. He can just feel some physical sensations that aren't in the physical body. This is also a perception of energy. And through the perception of energy, his self-awareness continues to develop. And at some point, while observing his energy, he suddenly discovers how someone else's vibration is implanting itself into him. How does it start to spread? For example, it can come from below, through the chest, and reach the head. It can start to irritate you from the outside in some way. It appears as an irritant. And you observe this and think, well, okay, but this isn't mine. Why am I reacting to this? But what if you don't have that ability? If you can't distinguish your vibration from someone else's vibration, if you can't distinguish your energy from someone else's energy, then you fall under the influence of foreign consciousness.
So a person who is generally not familiar with their own energy can perceive someone else's energy, right? So some kind of connection to him instead of his own.
Absolutely right, indeed.
And how does this happen? So a person will actually be...
Listen, this actually happens not only on the level of energy, but it also happens on the level of the psyche. You know, people who have been in a crowd at least once in their lives will understand me. And it doesn't really matter what kind of crowd it is. It could be a crowd at a stadium. It could be a crowd, some kind of rally or something like that. It can be, yes, it can be any crowd. And the crowd charges everyone to the same wavelength. And a person, being in this crowd, can start to act in a way that is completely uncharacteristic for them. That is completely uncharacteristic for him. Absolutely uncharacteristic. He can later watch a video where he's in that crowd, doing something and say, I couldn't. That's not me. What happened? Well, maybe the demons have taken over me, right? Demons and everything else. But in reality, it's just an influence. Knowledgeable people manage crowds. If a person has fire in their heart, they are unaffected by others. So it works on the level of the psyche too.
So, if someone has passion, then no connections, no influences from certain beings from the second or fifth gates are impossible. From the second gates, it's definitely impossible. You say, from the second, from the fifth gates, it's generally impossible.
Well, it's definitely impossible from the second gates. So you can just encounter this, but this won't move you from your spot in any way. So you just observe it and say, yeah, well, where is this going? It's funny. As for the fifth gates, there are much more conscious beings there, much stronger ones. Intelligent. Knowledgeable. So, there. With a fiery heart, one can be tempted to interact with them. There's already a mutually beneficial story happening there. Mostly, people really love to boast about this. Well, the angels are protecting me there. Well, what's the point? You're still going to exist and die anyway. What's the point of them protecting you?
So, for example, from the fifth gate, you can have some positive, let's say, influence, right?
Well, positive. How is it positive? As long as you are in a physical body. You're not always in a physical body. So, you are given this illusion of protection. Well, this is protection, right? But, well, okay, there. She protects you. But you're still basically in the same rhythm as everyone else. Well, it's the same as, well, there are people with connections in power structures. Well, they behave, who knows how. Well, they run away from the law's retribution. Well, they behave, who knows how. But globally, what does it give them? Well, they run away from the law's retribution. But globally, what does it give them? Just the opportunity to degrade even faster. But globally, what does it give them? Just the opportunity to degrade even faster. And so, when a person is under the protection of some powerful being, what happens? Well, mainly, he has a much higher temptation to degrade because he understands that there will be no consequences for it. But you can't deceive your own soul. What are they protecting him from? From the consequences of his own foolishness. If a person doesn't do anything stupid, then there's nothing to protect him from. If you live purely, why do you need to protect at all? Why do you need protection? You're doing just fine. Therefore, from my point of view, these are absolutely meaningless processes. But I know that people love to play with this, and they love it. They really do. I'm not involved in that.
So you hear things you shouldn't be hearing. You feel things you shouldn't be feeling. You have panic attacks there, a wild weakness.
Here's moment. And in our heads, we hear a voice. And the biggest joke is that this voice is not us. This voice is an inner dialogue. It can be very intrusive. It can be very persistent. It can tell you about something. For example, about your child or your husband, or about some person on the contrary, and you treat this voice as if it's your own thought. I'm thinking right now I'm using logic and reasoning to reach some great truths. And then suddenly it turns out that it's all just you overthinking things. That's not true. So what does a person do? Well, yeah, I overthought things, but it's fine. And again, they start overthinking for some other reason. And very few people clearly know what this is. The voice is an alien consciousness. This is yet another form of an inorganic being that attaches to us somewhere in childhood. Our cocoon hasn't fully formed yet. It finds a child. It locates them by the glow of their consciousness and latches on somewhere around the head and spends its whole life hugging the person, pretending to be its voice.
So it turns out that any thoughts that spin around in our heads, it's not us, but people have gotten used to associating themselves with them. But how do you stop these thoughts?
Stop the thoughts. And it becomes very obvious that it's not yours when, look, I have a hand. I can use this hand to pick up the phone. I can put the phone down. My hand is completely under my control. Why? Because it's me. But why don't people realize that when they don't want to think, they can't do anything about it? Blah, 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 blah. You say, yeah, I don't want to think, that's it. I want to meditate. I want silence. I want peace. Just stop it. And there it is again. Blah, 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 blah. Look, you've already sat here for a whole 1.5 seconds without a thought. See how great you are. Wow. So it turns out you can be without thoughts. And you realize here that, wait, I'm thinking again, literally. Just a few seconds pass before we find ourselves in a state of completely no thoughts, just white noise in the head, just a few seconds. And then, it seems like I finally got it. All the practice works. What a great practice I managed to achieve. There are 1.5 seconds, and you're back again. Blah, 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 blah. So you can't control it. You don't have the power to manage it because this thing is controlling you. But if you don't bend in your intention to shut this creature up, it will keep going. It's an alien consciousness. If you are absolutely tireless in your attempts, in your actions to be free from its influence, then at some point suddenly, and it's quiet there. And I'm like, okay, let me think of something.
And it doesn't work.
What to think about? What to think about?
And how do you get there?
To practice? Everything. I did everything. I trained, all the exercises, I did. I've almost completely published it. This winter, another practice will be published, a very serious practice called the Fire Column. And there will also be a tour in Peru where I will be demonstrating practices related to the Sri Yantra, and all of this in a conglomerate in practical energy at an incredible speed. These are the exercises that I did. These are the exercises that finally allowed me to hear the silence. And this thing doesn't talk to me anymore. But this also needs to be understood. If I suddenly, for any reason, if I start to degrade, if I start to lose my fire, if I start to lose my mobility, my energy will start to spasm, tighten up, and come to a halt. I guarantee this thing will find me in space and grab me again. The fire should not only be in the heart. Yeah, you won't grab me by the heart anymore. But the fire should be everywhere. Where you don't have fire, there's a high chance of getting stuck to something.
I think that's a complete detailed answer. Thank you.
Do you want to unlock your inner strength and learn to manage energy? The course, Power of Consciousness 1. Practical Energy will provide you with tools to improve health, develop intuition, and gain a deeper understanding of the world. Join and start changing your life right now. Link in the description.